Welcome to Corwin's Teacher to Teacher podcast with host Carol Pelletier Radford. Carol is an experienced classroom teacher, university educator, founder of mentoringinAction.com, and author of 4 best-selling professional books for teachers. She believes the best form of professional learning happens when teachers engage in authentic conversations and share their wisdom. In every episode, Carol and her guests share stories about pivotal moments in their careers, successful classroom strategies, and personal actions they take to minimize stress and stay healthy. The Teacher to Teacher podcast is a place to engage in authentic conversation and reflection with experienced educators. We hope these conversations will energize you, keep you inspired, and remind you why you chose to become a teacher.
Hello, and welcome to the Teacher to Teacher podcast. I'm Liz Gilday, Senior Acquisitions Editor here at Corwin. This season of the podcast focuses on mentoring in action. We have such a timely episode to share with you today on the topic of educator well-being. Our guests are Josh Magri and Sydney Snyder. Josh is a third-year chemistry teacher at a high school in Virginia, and Sydney is a principal associate at Supported and the author of best-selling Corwin books, Unlocking Multilingual Learners' Potential, Strategies for Making Content Accessible, and Culturally Responsive Teaching for Multilingual Learners, Tools for Equity. I love how this episode unpacks educator well-being beyond teacher self-care. It's about instilling practices and building environments where educators can thrive even in challenging times. Carol, Sydney, and Josh share impactful ideas to help teachers and leaders foster vulnerable conversations, rethink how we define success, give ourselves grace when we make mistakes, and find balance between our personal and professional lives. They highlight that educator well-being requires both recognizing challenges and celebrating victories. I can't wait for you to hear this refreshing and authentic discussion.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Pelletier Radford, and I am the host of this great podcast, Teacher to Teacher. And today we have 2 guests that I will be introducing in a moment. So the theme of this season, season 4, is mentoring in action. And this is all about conversations where we actually are talking about what's happening in real time in schools, like mentoring in action. And the Teacher to Teacher podcast is unique in some ways because I invite guests that don't know each other. So I have 2 guests today, and this topic that we're going to dive into in a moment it's episode 5, and it's a focus on teacher well-being. Educator well-being. So for those of you who are administrators that might be listening, is like, hey, what about us? We need well-being as well. Yes, so school leaders, educators, teacher, I'm using the word teacher broadly, and it's going to be a time where we can kind of dig in a little and, you know, discuss like what's this all about and why do we need to think about it. But before we get there, let me let my guests introduce themselves. I have a beginning teacher, a third-year teacher. Josh will introduce himself, and then I have a very experienced teacher, Sydney, who's going to introduce herself in her role as a consultant. So, hey guys, how are you doing?
Hi,
Wow.
thanks for having us.
Yay, I'm glad you're here. So, Josh, let's hear about you. Where are you? Where are you teaching? Why are you teaching?
Sure. My name is Josh Magri. I'm a third-year chemistry teacher currently residing in Salem, Virginia. I work at Salem High School, so right in the town in which I live, which is super convenient for me. I currently this year have 6 courses of chemistry that I have with a total of 135 or so students, which is really exciting for me. A big caseload, but a nice challenge. It's been nice. I taught middle school part of the time last year, and taught AP my very first year teaching. I started halfway through a year, so my experience has been a little bit funky, but I've been very, very grateful that everything has worked out for me and that I've had the experience. So I'm excited to be
Thank
here.
you, Josh. Okay, so full disclosure, everyone, I do know Josh. So I handpicked him for this podcast. I met Josh about 3 years ago, before he was in his own classroom. I was an invited guest at Roanoke College doing a keynote on teacher well-being, educator well-being, using my book, Teaching with Light. And Josh was one of my handlers, I guess. Is that what I would call it? Getting me from here to there and making sure I didn't miss anything. And we actually just connected, and I invited Josh. We did a live podcast at the college on the stage in front of 300 people that were in the audience, and Josh interviewed me. So the tables are turned, Josh. Do you remember that? What's your
I do.
memory of that?
It was an awesome experience. I feel like I learned a lot. One of the things that I've taken from Carol in that time is just grow where you go. I've been fortunate to get a job and make the most of what that job has been, even though it's been kind of crazy over the last couple of years and has looked different every time. But like I said, super grateful for everything and where I've ended up, and excited that my path has gotten across with
Yeah.
Carol again.
Thank you. Welcome to teaching. It's going to be like that forever. Your paths crossing. And Sydney, a pleasure to meet you. Welcome.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Sydney Snyder. I'm a principal associate at Support Ed. We're a woman-owned small business based out of the DC area, and we focus on educational equity for multilingual learners. And prior to my work at Support Ed, I was an English language development or an ESL teacher.
Oh, welcome. It's a lot of work, and it's an important mission that you're on, because our students need teachers who can engage them in all the content areas. So what you're doing is admirable and needed, and I'm just glad that the two of you are going to have this talk with me on well-being. But before we get there, my heart is really in mentoring and mentor training, and that's kind of how I started. So I'd like each of you to kind of share a moment from your own experience as a teacher or observing, when you were either mentored or being mentored or mentored someone. Josh, let's start with you. What does mentoring mean to you?
Sure. When you say the word mentoring, my mind goes back to when I was a student. I feel like I owe most of my successes in life to people who have put time and effort into growing who I am. I grew up with the most fantastic babysitter in the world who instilled in me a really big belief in that education was important. We would come home after school. The first thing we would do with her is sit down, get our homework done, and then wait for our parents to come pick us up. But we were not allowed to get up from that table until that homework was done. And just all my teachers in high school, there's one moment that sticks out. A teacher named Miss Brown. She took the time, as not even a teacher of mine, but as an advisor of a club, to really instill leadership opportunities into me. So I got to be the president of what we called our Hope Club, trying to find ways to bring random acts of kindness to other students in the school. And there was one day after school where we were planning some elaborate project that I had cooked up that week. And she looked at me and could tell that the stress of being a senior in high school was kind of taking its toll. And she said, Josh, it's okay to let the weight of the world off of your shoulders. And she had to highlight, because I am quite a small guy, that, my shoulders aren't that broad, and that there's only so much that I, as one person, can carry, and that she was there to support me. There were other people in the building that cared about me and loved me. And she knew that everything for me was going to work out. And she just wanted me to know that. That was an emotional moment for me. I remember crying in her room that afternoon and her handing me a box of tissues and giving me a hug. And that was the first time that we had ever had a connecting moment like that. It had always just been she was my advisor. I would go and chat with her about advising stuff. And she really kind of broke down that barrier for me to say, hey, look, we got you. It's going to be okay. And I was really grateful for that. I think it's exactly what I needed to hear at a time in my life where I thought that a lot more was on my shoulders than it needed to be, deciding where I was going to go to school. I ended up moving 10 hours away from home, which was a big decision. And so I owe a lot to her in that regard.
Thank you for sharing that story, and I'm glad you brought back a memory of being a student in high school. So this podcast, yes, it's about mentoring, but it's mentoring at all levels. Teacher, student, student, uh, experienced teacher, novice teacher, and I appreciate the vulnerability for you to share that and let us hear how mentoring touches us when someone really sees us. And those are the kinds of conversations that in many ways will you know, lead to this conversation that we're going to have in this episode about well-being, because she saw that. She saw your well-being was compromised and she knew how much you could contribute. And that's a special teacher. And I think we're all mentors. It's not like officially, I'm the mentor of this new teacher. Everyone in the school is watching everyone else. But the courage is more about what is somebody willing to do about it. Like she could have walked by, she could have just let it be what it was, but that experience and story, that aha moment that you've carried with you, and then you just are sharing this on a national podcast is huge. And I want our listeners to really take it in and hear how important it is for us to go beyond the title of mentor to the act of mentoring. So, Sydney, what's your reaction to that story? And then I want to hear yours.
Um, I think I think what you're saying, Carol, is so true about how we pay attention to one another and really look out for those that we can see might need our help. Um, and I think that's kind of what my story is about also, is like that, how we create the space for that. Um, when you asked me to come on this show, I was thinking about my own experiences with mentoring and what that looked like. And I realized that for a lot of my early teaching days, I didn't feel like I had a strong mentor. Um, and I think that that can be true, especially in the world of like English language development teachers who might be the only one at their school. Um, but after I got my master's and I had just finished my student teaching, I ended up getting a long-term sub job teaching ninth and 11th grade English. So it wasn't, I wanted to be teaching ESL, but I got this English job, and it was a hard time, honestly. I feel like, look back, I think about all the mistakes that I made in terms of my lessons, in terms of the procedures or routines I didn't put into place, or should have, and the ways I responded to students. And at the end of the year, I was at like a lunch for all of the English department, and it came out that it had been a hard time for me. And this very kind, woman in the department said to me, "Oh, you could have come and asked us for help." And I just thought, really? Could I? And I still thinking back, I'm like, why didn't I ask for help? Was it that was it on me that I didn't want to admit that I was having problems? Was it the culture of the school where it didn't really seem open? But fast forward a couple of years from there, I got a job teaching at a private boarding school. And I was one of two teachers teaching ESL. The other was the department head who hired me. And the two of us shared an office. And I would come back to that office after teaching, and we could talk about anything. Things we were thinking about our lessons, concerns about students, visions that we had for helping students get more integrated into the community. And I realized what it was to have a space where I could feel vulnerable, I could be vulnerable, where I could say, I'm having trouble with this, or this is something I'm wondering about. What do you think? And it was okay. And so to me, that's the kind of space when we talk about teacher well-being, educator well-being, we need to have that space where we can feel free to ask those questions and reflect.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Josh, I'm going to let you react to what those two stories, because they kind of connect, but there's something in there that I think is worth teasing out a little bit. What do you think?
Yeah, the first story of not knowing like that you even have the capacity to ask for help really resonates with me as somebody who's just starting out and remember those first 6 months of my career very vividly. I also, in some sense, took a long-term sub job where I picked up a classroom halfway through the year. And just that sense of what did I get myself into? And that overwhelming, like, what do I do? I see that I'm making mistakes. I don't know what to do about them. I don't want the students to think that I don't know what I'm doing because I'm making mistakes, but they can definitely tell that I know that I'm making mistakes.
They know everything.
And
It's true.
that like is a real feeling. And I still
Yes.
feel sometimes that like, oop, I made a mistake today. I'm not so sure what to do about that one, but we're going to figure it out tomorrow. But I agree with the second story sentiment of like, once you find that group of people that you can trust and can work with and have that, like, we can talk about anything relationship, it feels really nice. I have a work mom at work who has kind of taken me in, where we teach the same subject, which is super nice. If I notice that my kids struggled on a topic, balancing equations, I could go across the hall or next door and say, so do you have any ideas? Because this is not going so well today. And I can pick up, we share the same planning period. She'll say, all right, this is what I do. And I try it for the rest of the day. Usually it works because she knows what she's talking about. But it is that like almost freedom that
Yeah.
I actually have somebody who can bounce ideas off of. It would make work a lot more difficult, I feel like, if I did not have that where I am
love that.
currently.
All right. So thank you both for that, because it gives us the context for the conversation on well-being. So what you just said, Josh, too, we need mentors. We need a variety of mentors. I always say it's the whole team, because we we are trying to help students be successful. All right, so I have my own little business, mentoring for mentoring in action, and our motto, our mission is transform education for students by supporting novice teachers and their mentors. Because if I help Josh be a better novice teacher, his kids are going to learn more. So we know that the content is important. um, so content mentoring, and then I want to introduce this idea of, I'm not going to call it mentoring, well-being awareness, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. So here's why I got into this from mentoring in action. So I've written books for Corwin over the years, and I do a lot of trainings for teachers to train mentors, because I really believe mentors have to be prepared and supported for these conversations. They have to have that awareness to know when the teacher needs help. Instead of saying, you should have asked me for help, we have to be proactive. And in my courses, it would be how to see that the teacher needs help, or how to just have regular meetings. So you're having that experience at Sydney that you had in the second story. That's just part of it, the mentoring. We meet once a week, and whatever comes up, you're creating a safe space. So what happened is, I was doing some of these trainings in some larger school districts, and at the end of the session, some mentors came up to me and they just said, we don't have any problem with the content. It's the social and emotional feelings of our novice teachers. Like, we don't know what to do. Like, they're overwhelmed. They just want to talk about the mistakes and the what isn't working, and it takes away from like the whole conversation of student learning. Like, I'm trying to do this really coaching, instructional we have the instructional coaches, and their content, right, pedagogy, strategies. And the mentors, it really stuck with me. Like, oh my God, how am I going to integrate that into the mentoring, the preparation of mentors? So this whole journey for me led to the book that Josh interviewed me on, Teaching with Light, which is a book of vulnerable stories from my teaching, and then getting other teachers to tell their vulnerable stories. But the well-being piece, I kind of shifted to, so what are you going to do about it? It's like, we all have those stories. Teaching's always been hard. Before COVID, after COVID, it was hard 10 years ago. It's hard when I was teaching. So we can't just lay this idea that we're never going to get any better. I'm not going to buy that. I'm not going to buy that. But I do see that mentoring for well-being has to be directly addressed. And I'm not talking self-care as much as what you two are kind of bringing up, the safe space for a conversation, the um, the feeling of going next door and asking content or emotional, like the other mentor in high school just said, listen, let that weight off your shoulders. That's kind of a different mentoring in action conversation, but you have to have an awareness with another person to step into that zone is a little trickier than let me show you some strategies for teaching chemistry. So that's my entree into the conversation. And I'd like the two of you to just react to what I said and see how does it relate to where you sit. Who wants to go first?
I'll start. So I do a lot of coaching in my work, and we're focused on strategies for teaching multilingual learners. That's the focus of the coaching. But I think if a teacher is having a behavior issue in the class that's disrupting, that makes it really hard to implement the strategies, then that's what we need to create the space to talk about. So I think connecting back to this idea of teacher well-being, through mentoring, we have to be there or have the space to talk about what the teacher needs to talk about, right? It's kind of like we say, if the student comes to school and they haven't had breakfast or they have things going on at home, and then we're trying to teach them the math, like we need to think about what are those other factors. And I think it's the same, it's true for educators. It's really hard for us to focus on the practice if these other factors are having a big impact on our work.
Right. And it's becoming more and more prevalent, I think. And I don't know if it's after COVID, before COVID. I think it's always been there. It just wasn't spoken. Josh, what do you think about well-being and what we're talking about, and how do you handle it?
I think for me, just off of what Sydney just shared, that sense of like knowing that teachers have other things in their mind going on, that teachers are humans, beyond just this kind of omnipotent being at the front of a classroom who's supposed to know everything about their subject and be prepared for anything in their classroom. I think trying to get past that barrier for me in my first couple of years has been hard. Like, I recognize that I'm a human and that I'm not perfect every day. And it took me a while to get to that point of like, it's okay. I made a mistake today. We'll fix it tomorrow, move on. And my favorite part about my work mom is that if I go across the room and I'll tell her, or across the hall and I'll tell her that I made a mistake today, she'll look at me and she'll go, okay, I made that mistake 10 years ago. You're good. I'm still here. You'll still be here tomorrow.
You'll still be here.
And
so is it fear that comes up as a beginning teacher? Talk a little bit about what it feels like to be in those beginning emotional stages, because a lot of us that are listening are experienced, and we're like, okay, yeah, we got you, but say a little more about how you feel.
Sure. I mean, for me, it's definitely fear. I'm a pretty anxious person in general, so it rolls over into what I do with work. I'm also hyper aware of what I look like. Like I mentioned before, I'm a little guy. I'm often mistaken for my students because I look like I should still be in high school. And I work in a building where up until a week ago, I was the youngest person in that building by about 5 to 10 years. So as a high school teacher, that's pretty glaring, and it makes me feel like I've got a lot of weight on my shoulders of, hey, I'm the young dog on campus. If I'm not pulling my weight, then I am, one, making the rest of the people who are my age and teachers not look so good, because I'm our only representation of that in the building.
Wow.
And it also makes me feel like I really got to step it up. How can I, try and get my results to look like my coworkers that have been here for 20 years? Because I want to feel like I can, play with the big dogs, right? I
Yeah.
want to feel like I'm part of a team that's contributing to student success. And it's really hard when I look at my results and I see the gaps between my coworker who's been teaching chemistry for 20 years and me, who's been teaching for 2.5, 3 years. And knowing that a lot of it is experience and I'm just going to have to, get better at what I do. But I'm a perfectionist, so I want it to be good now. And knowing that there's that
Right.
difference, I got to just live with it. And it
Wow.
stinks sometimes, but it is what it is.
Well, you're aware of it though, and I think part of the well-being strategies, I guess, I don't know what they are, is knowing what it is that's triggering you. And I think you said it very eloquently, and it's a process of learning, and it isn't going to change in 2.5 years. It's a developmental continuum. Sydney, any reaction? What do you want to say to Josh?
What I want to say is a couple of things. One, I want to make sure that we're creating spaces for educators that don't feel like we're judging each other. Like I think um, why do people go into education? And Carol, I think you said it at the beginning, right? We go in because we want to support students in learning. We want to, and so we have this mission that's driving our work. And to me, that means we should approach other educators with the assumption that they have the best of intentions. I think that's one. And then the other piece, I think, is recognizing that all teachers, just like we say our students bring different strengths to the classroom, educators bring different strengths to the classroom. And even experienced teachers, we still have things to learn, right? So I think like you're coming in there, Josh, and you have things that you probably just learned from your studies that you could share with your colleagues. So recognizing and I think that's part of mentoring too. How do we create those spaces where we can share the things that we're good at and then also ask questions about the things we need more support with?
I love that. Thanks. And the other thing too, Josh, I feel like the well-being connection to all of this, I'm using it broadly. It's like how we feel as human beings in the role of teachers, right? Um, it's not the mani-pedi or the going out after work self-care that I'm talking about. And you can, I mean, it's good for people to do those things too, but it's that safe place to be vulnerable. It's it's not measuring our success always around the test scores and the instruction, which I know is a huge thing. And it's easy. People might say, well, that's easy for you. Like I'm under a lot of, they have to pass these tests. And we know that they always had to pass tests. I mean, when I was teaching, but I feel like the well-being, personal well-being choices for us have to be seeing beyond that. And you see it, but it can't be the whole thing. It can't be the whole thing. As a chemistry teacher, you're actually teaching people, your students, how to react when you make a mistake. I mean, that's like a life skill. Some people don't know how to do that. I know adults that will never admit to a mistake because they never learned, they never had a model that they felt safe enough to say, I made that mistake. So I like what Sydney just said, and I just want to underscore that for you as a beginning teacher and for those beginning teachers who are listening to expand your definition of success, right? What does that feel like for you?
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%. I think that people in my, first couple of years teaching, a lot of what I hear is burnout. And a
Yes,
lot of it's because
yes,
a lot of us are perfectionists. We want to see good things happen. And when we don't see things perfect, it's a weight, right?
right.
But with that being said, that sense of allowing for creativity, I think Sydney put it really well, that there is something that we can all bring to the table, and trying to remember that and encourage that of my other younger peers. That would be something that I would try and recommend, because it's been one of my highlights, This past year, I got to turn my classroom into a mini restaurant for an activity that I did, and my students lost their minds because they thought
they
I
loved
was
it.
crazy.
I love it.
But just things like that we can,
And I
find new
think
ways
it's
to
the
do old things.
pause in the well-being. So how are we defining well-being? Like we're still exploring it, I think. I'm trying to distinguish it from self-care because that is now like a bad rap. It's like, I don't want self-care, I don't meditate, mindfulness. Although I'm into mindfulness. I am a yoga instructor and did the training. And I think those pauses and those inspirations in the Teaching with Light book, you sent those to me, Josh, that you had posters in your room. So how does inspiration play into your well-being? Talk a little bit about that.
For me, I feel like it's a lot of satisfaction. Like when I see a moment of inspiration for students, like I can see that something has clicked in their head, the
Okay.
light bulb moments that we all talk about. That's when I feel the most satisfied with the work that I do.
Okay.
I'm very self-aware that chemistry is not for everybody, and that
Right.
most of my students are taking it for a graduation requirement and they just
Right.
want to get through. But when I can, pique their interest with something out of the ordinary. Today, my class talked about carbon monoxide, and we got to talk about real life applications of what carbon monoxide poisoning is. And they all kind
Oh,
of had that moment of like, really? This is something that can happen? And I had to be like,
oh,
yes,
yeah.
guys, this is real. But that moment of like, wait, this actually does apply to my life. Like I
Right. The
learned something new
relevance,
today.
bringing that relevance in. So I think those moments do contribute to our well-being. It's again, it's being aware that that's happening and that's part of the well-being. Sydney, chime in. What is the definition of well-being that we can live with that fits with mentoring? And as we're talking about mentoring, it's everybody's a mentor. So what do you think?
I think it is celebrating those moments of success, whatever they look like. And especially when we feel like they connect back to kind of our purpose or what motivates us. So if we're trying to get students engaged, we're trying to help them make connections between chemistry and their lives, and you succeeded in doing that. That's a huge celebration, and that's going to bring a lot for well-being, I think. So
Yes.
we need more celebrations, I think.
I guess we do. And that different way of measuring success. So that's through the mentor's eyes, and it's also through um, our own eyes, our own self-awareness of acknowledging what would we like to be acknowledged for.
Mhm.
So Josh, what would you like to be acknowledged for as a beginning teacher, a third-year teacher? If somebody was going to acknowledge self-acknowledgement, that's part of well-being and mindfulness. So share, what would you like to be acknowledged for?
I had my mid-year evaluation yesterday, so I am perhaps a little bit in the right mind space to talk about, acknowledgement, because my boss
Good.
had the moment to say to me, like she could see me getting more confident in what I'm doing, and that she was proud of me for taking on more responsibility. And that sense of acknowledgement of like, I do belong here. I've got this. It's been a
Oh,
couple of years. I've got, my shoes wet, my feet wet, however you want to say it. Just
Mhm.
I'm ready to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm getting comfortable in where I am. I'm not as worried anymore. And to see somebody else notice that in me when I didn't notice it in myself was huge.
and now you are noticing it in yourself. And look at you, you're on a podcast, a national podcast, sharing your wisdom. And this is what other listeners that are beginning teachers are using. They're listening to this. This is the wisdom that we all need to hear. We can't keep it private. And I think that's part of well-being, is sharing what's working, as Sydney said, the successes and uh, all of that. Sydney, what are your thoughts? What would you like to be acknowledged for in the work you do that embraces mentoring and well-being in the work with your multilingual learners and teachers?
Um, some of the best acknowledgement I can get in my coaching is when a teacher says to me like, "Oh, this is so much better than I thought it was going to be." I'm brought in there, and they're not really sure if they want to do this, but we've collaborated in support of multilingual learners, and it's been helpful. So to me,
And
that's
they could
the best
do it. It was
acknowledgement.
like,
Yeah.
That is. But see, we have to mentor each other. So mentoring in action is us having this conversation, three strangers. Well, I kind of knew Josh, but who are willing to be honest and authentic and bring these topics forward. So I have a couple more things as gosh, the time went by so fast today. I love this topic. We have to keep integrating it into mentoring, into schools, into conversations, into our way of being mindful. And I like to read some affirmations, and I usually read them at the end, but I'm going to read them now because I'd like you each to give me a little tip or advice on how we can do this, because all of our listeners are like, there's no way we can remain balanced. So affirmation from mentors, which includes everybody. I model a healthy balance in my personal and professional lives. And an affirmation for novice teachers. Listen, Josh, I balance my personal and professional lives. So take that in. And I'm already hearing the listeners go, yeah, like, how do you do that? And give me some tips for that. So, Josh, what is some advice that you would give about maintaining the balance? Because we believe in it. We do believe in it. We just need to do it. So, what advice would you have for yourself and beginning teachers?
I think the first thing is to recognize that as a beginning teacher, I get it. It feels really, really hard to walk away from work. I remember staying at work until 5 p.m., 6 p.m., those first 6 months of working, just trying to get my head above water. The biggest thing that has helped me in the last year, mostly, find some more balance is I pick one day a week. Usually it's a Tuesday because it's kind of right after Monday, which is always hard getting right back into things. Just to leave it all at work. I leave my laptop at
Yes.
work. I don't look at work emails after I leave. And I just go home and I snuggle my cat on the couch and I take a day. And that's more that self-care kind of personal
And
well-being. But
it is, and do it. And I love that. Yesterday, I took a no tech day, which is really hard because I'm addicted to my phone. So, but there was a thing that a book I read that was like, take one day a week off, no tech. And that's kind of what you're reminding me of. And even an hour, I mean, it makes a huge difference. So, congratulations, new teachers. I hope you're listening, and all teachers. All right, Sydney, what's your advice or um, way to balance?
Yeah, I really like what Josh said. I like that idea of like having it be a very definitive strategy. I was thinking something more broader, like recognizing that every lesson doesn't have to be perfect. So, right? And sometimes we're going to have the energy to spend more time on making those lessons more creative, and sometimes we have to remember, okay, we're going to go in there and we're going to, this is what we're going to focus on, and we don't have as much time to spend with the lesson. So I guess like just having some self-acceptance around that maybe, or
Yes, I love that. I love that. And it could be a little closure or a sense of humor. Like Josh, I heard you say earlier, well, that didn't work. I better go across the hall and ask for another idea. But sometimes that just closes it up
yeah,
instead of letting it fester. Like it affects our well-being when we fester about it. Being a perfectionist doesn't have to be all bad. It helps us strive. And it's just what you're saying, Sydney, is important is you have to know when to stop it.
yeah,
It's like, okay, I'm a perfectionist and now it stops. That lesson did not work. And you just say it not like beating ourselves up.
right.
It's a social and emotional skill set. I believe that. I do. So as we wind down, I want to hear just a little bit about what you two are involved in. Like, I know, Sydney, you've written some books, and Josh, you've got projects at school. And I want to kind of close out this episode with with kind of listening to what's going on with you in the topic of chemistry or school, or Sydney in your multilingual work. So Sydney, tell us what's going on. What do you want to share with us?
I just really love this conversation this evening because I'm doing a lot of coaching. I'm coaching in an elementary school this year, and I'm coaching in a career and tech ed program, a CTE program for secondary. And I'm always thinking about how to have conversations with teachers that are really going to support them and support them in supporting their students. And I think that this idea of listening and making sure that they are they have the skills for self-care, or not the skills, but they have, they're thinking about that. And I'm creating space for that self-care in those discussions. I just think that's really important.
And tell us about your book. What's your title? Yeah, tell us
Sure,
about
I've
your
written
work.
a couple.
Okay.
So the first one is Unlocking Multilingual Learners' Potential, Strategies for Making Content Accessible. And then Culturally Responsive Teaching for Multilingual Learners, Tools for Equity. So those are the
So
two
who should be
books.
reading those books?
They are designed for any educator who has multilingual learners in their classes. So it's a
And
lot
give
of,
us one tip. Give me something. Everybody has multilingual learners, right?
yes,
Josh, do you?
my
Yes. So
my
give us
big tip
something.
is get the students talking. So set up
Ah,
your learning routine so you can have students talking. Um, yeah.
okay. I like that. All right, Josh, what's going on with you?
At work, I'm trying to do the best I can to tackle the ever so present problem with chronic absenteeism. Something really cool that our district does is offer students opportunities to make up time at a Saturday school session. So I'm spending that extra time myself to get some work done and help students finish up things that they might not have been able to get done for the week because they were out sick, or, you know, they had something happen at home that took them away for a little while. Whatever we can do to get those students back on their feet, that's been my primary focus this year. And it's been a lot of fun. I've gotten to meet a lot of students that I wouldn't get to meet otherwise. And
Yeah, because
I've
we're
learned a lot of new
mentoring.
subjects.
Right. I know you're branching out of your chemistry work, right? So, Sydney, you mentioned something about having the conversations with the teachers. So, one mentoring conversation that I use in the Mentoring in Action book that starts the conversation, and this is good with the students too, even in the Saturday school, is asking the question, what's working?
Mhm.
Because usually our brain goes to the mistake. I just made a mistake. Got to fix that. Got to, that's not working. I don't know how to do it. Because that's just teacher talk. That's teacher brain. We're problem solvers. So when we begin a conversation and just try it out with your groups, we have to do wait time. Because what I've noticed when I start a mentoring conversation with a teacher who's sitting down in front of me, and I say, "So tell me what's working." As the beginning question, silence. It's silent. And I have to wait. But I didn't expect that the first time that I did it. And you take a few moments, and then the teacher will speak, because we have to dig into the what's working, because that will help our well-being as well. So one thing with well-being and mindfulness, and what I learned in the yoga teacher training and what you're both saying, is strengths. It's like when we come from our strength. So usually when something works, we were coming from our strength. We might not have acknowledged that we were consciously, but it worked. And then another follow-up is, how can I help you? How can I support you? So you've got this student with another subject, and again, silence, because people and students and teachers don't really know what it is that I need support in. But that's a huge question, because they do know, but to take a moment to articulate it. So, Josh, what's working in your teaching that you know is working? Because we did talk a lot about what you're challenged by, and you are a beginning teacher, but everything's not a challenge. So what's working for you?
This year, I found a lot of success in helping students acquire skills, and chemistry is a pretty skill-based course. So how to write electron configurations, which if you were to look those up, you'd probably think are super, super tricky, super confusing. This year, my students did really, really well.
I
And
love that. And what's working in your work-life balance?
I think that packing everything up and leaving it at work on
Okay,
Tuesdays.
so keep doing that. Sydney, what's working in your consulting and your work in schools around your 2 books? What are you seeing from people reading those books?
Um, I think what's something that works for me is taking that time to listen. And then being willing, something that I really enjoy when I'm collaborating with teachers is like being willing to co-teach, try out a new strategy with a group of students that, I might be not that familiar with. So
I
taking,
love that. So
yeah,
stepping right up and
yeah,
co-teaching with them. I
that's
love it.
right.
I love it. Oh my goodness. This has been a great conversation. I think I have new ideas about what well-being is, and sometimes you just have to say things out loud. It's not a planned thing. I want you both to continue to think about well-being and how it influences you and your behaviors as a teacher. And let's just end with um, either what did you hear Sydney say? What did you hear Josh say? Or a takeaway from being on this podcast? Like what does it feel like to have this kind of a conversation? What are you taking away? What do our listeners need to hear from this? Josh?
I think Sydney said it best in that we just need to listen to each other and hear each other out. Um, if it wasn't for the fact that I have great coworkers where I work now that listen to me all the time, a great boss who will listen to anything that I have to say or any concern that I could bring up, I don't know that my first 3 years of teaching would have gone as well as they have. I've been lucky to have that experience. I know it's probably not the same for all my other first few year teachers out there, but finding someone who will listen to you, I think, is probably the best gift that you can give yourself, even if it's somebody who's not at work.
I love that. Sydney, what's a big takeaway from this conversation and listening to Josh, a beginning teacher? Any insights from this podcast guest appearance? What are you thinking?
I think having or taking the opportunity to be vulnerable with others and then reaching out for those people who accept your vulnerabilities and they are going to hold that for you and support you in those. I think it's important
Thank
for all
you.
of us.
Yes, it is. It's for all of us, wherever we are on the developmental continuum. I just want to thank both of you, bottom of my heart. I want to thank our listeners for listening. It is about listening and encouraging our listeners to listen to all the podcasts. The next episode, this was episode 5. So episode 6 is going to be a kind of a different spin. It's the role of teacher education in mentoring their graduates after they graduate. So I hope you will listen in to the next episode. Thank you both and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone, for joining today's Teacher to Teacher conversation. We hope this time together energized you, inspired you, and reminded you why you chose to become a teacher. You can purchase any of Carol's books and any books mentioned in the podcast online at www.corwin.com. Please leave a review and share this podcast with your colleagues. Thank you for listening to the Corwin Teacher to Teacher podcast, a place to share teacher wisdom and engage in authentic conversations with experienced educators.
Come explore Corwin's free new teacher toolkit and resources. We've curated these resources based on extensive research from teachers, coaches, and principals alike. Whether you are brand new or a veteran teacher, find ready-to-go teaching tools at corwin.com today.